Viewers, Islamist intolerance is proving to be a scourge that threatens to put freedom of expression, the cornerstone of democratic tradition, into the ICU of sorts. The lack of a specific and honest response to the outrages committed over the last week, stretching from New York, where Salman Rushdie was slashed, to Kashmir, where Sunil Bhatt was shot, suggests that those that woke liberals are for some reason quite content to let Islamist terrorism have an unchallenged moment. The question is, why? Why was there not an honest response to this egregious assault on the fundamentals of democracy? Let's put that question out tonight to Swapan Dasgupta, author, former member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, and a distinguished journalist in his own right, as well as Pavan Verma, author, former member of the Rajya Sabha, and a former civil servant. Mr. Dasgupta, look across the literary landscape, and apart from 2 or 3 authors, no one really called out what was the real problem, which is this spurt, or perhaps inherent, if I may, intolerance among certain Islamists. Why did we see a large number of political figures, liberals, going further than platitudinous condemnation?
Rahul, I think you've hit the head on the nail. You've hit the nail on the head by correctly identifying the so-called squeamishness on the part of the liberals. Now, why are liberals important, you may ask? Liberals are important because they still dominate and influence a very large section of the literary establishment. They control the publishing industry to a very large extent, and their influence matters in setting the tone of politics, certainly in the Western world. Now, what has been happening over the past years is that they have very successfully converted Islamic intolerance and terrorism into a facet of victimhood, to make it appear that these are the people who are actually victims of a graver intolerance in society, of a certain prejudice in the mind, Islamophobia as they call it. Now, I do admit that there is a bit of Islamophobia in this world, but this Islamophobia arose partly because of the depredations which we've been seeing almost uninterrupted for the past 30 years or so, and which reached its peak during 9/11, and which still is there in fits and spurts. And what we saw in the slashing of Salman Rushdie, what we saw in the attacks, the beheading with the videotape of a gentleman in Udaipur who had dared support Nupur Sharma. We saw this selective targeting of Kashmiri Hindus in the valley. We're just seeing example after example, some of which publicized and reported, but many in, say, in a state like West Bengal, which goes largely unreported. And it's because of this protective layer which the liberals have been giving to this brand of Islamic intolerance that gives them the audacity, that gives them the succor to be able to perpetuate these things with the belief that, yes, there'll be some few token protests, but we will get our message through loud and clear. And this is what is happening, and that's the tragedy.
Mr. Verma, how do you respond to this?
First of all, Rahul, I want to unequivocally condemn Islamic extremism. I was on your channel recently where I emphatically condemned the attack on Salman Rushdie, and I said that such kind of extremism and fanaticism in the name of religion is just not or cannot be accepted. So let there be no doubt about the fact that there is any prevarication or ambivalence in condemning what happened in New York, what Islamic extremists have been doing elsewhere, including in the case of the gruesome beheading of two Hindus we saw in Rajasthan on as a reaction to the Nupur Sharma incident. So, I mean, these need to be unequivocally condemned, and I do so. I, in fact, go beyond. I condemn all kinds of excesses and fanaticism in the name of religion. And therefore, I believe that this duality, where you believe that there is a certain understanding or indulgence to Islamic terrorism and some kind of excessive reaction to what the Hindu ultra-right may do or any other religion may do, I frankly, speaking for myself, it doesn't exist. What we need to do, I think, is to create an atmosphere and a milieu where zero tolerance to religious extremism is practiced. I don't think that liberal opinion takes a soft stand on Islamic extremism, in my view.
Really?
And I believe strongly that what happened to the Kashmiri Pandits in the 90s needed far greater condemnation by liberal opinion. And I have written about it, including in my last book, The Great Hindu Civilization. Therefore, I think this debate where somehow it is assumed that some people soft pedal Islamic extremism is wrong, I emphatically condemn it. And I also say that all religious fanatics,
no, now, one second.
Religious extremism,
I get that. Now we're repeating
wrong,
ourselves. But Mr. Verma, Mr. Verma, the fact is that you speak for, at least in some people's perception, the liberal order in this country. Now, you are speaking perhaps as a thought leader first and a politician second. At least you consider yourself that. But I'm afraid some of your political bedfellows, and I have examples here. Look at Shashi Tharoor. Sad if creative expression can no longer be free and open. There is a great degree of ambivalence here. This is his quote. He tweeted it. Look at Ashwini Handa, another Congress leader, Rashid Alvi, very prominent Congress face, and the Congress party still says that it is the fulcrum around which liberal politics survives in this country. Now, for better or for worse, let me ask you. Rashid Alvi says freedom of expression has its own limits. You can't hurt religious sentiments. Motive is unknown. This is after the fact that Hadi Matar, the attacker, came out and said, I don't like the person. I don't think he's a very good person. He somehow attacked Islam. He attacked the belief system. I have read a couple of pages of the satanic verses. When I heard he survived, I was surprised, I guess. Ayatollah Khomeini is a great person. And he went on to do what he did. Every other day in the valley, you have a whole bunch of Kashmiri Hindus who are targeted. And in some cases, the threats are acted upon and you have outrages. I don't see anyone coming out and saying that this is the problem with Islamist extremism. Even when Nupur Sharma was threatened, no one came out and said that she doesn't deserve to die. In fact, there was an implicit sort of, yes, she deserved it, kind of nod. So while you speak for yourself, I really want to pin you down and ask you, your own leader, the TMC leader, and Jayaprakash Majumdar, TMC leader, says previously too, intolerance was seen across the world. Like there's intolerance under Modi rule, it's elsewhere too. So, I'm just saying, this doesn't suggest that there is an unambivalent condemnation or the recognition of the real problem?
First of all, as you know, I am no longer in the TMC, but I
Right,
was.
sorry, it's difficult
Let me
sometimes
say
to
to
keep track,
that
Mr. Verma.
one narrative.
Yeah, sorry about that, yes.
No,
Yeah.
I only joined one more party after the JDU.
Okay.
But anyway,
Right.
one narrative, as you have put it, which reflects some of the weaknesses of liberal thought, does not eclipse a counter narrative, which is that instead of saying that liberals are forgiving or less condemnatory, I think we all need to introspect. I'm sure Swapan would agree with this, whether there is a right atmosphere and what has been done to bridge the fault lines between religious communities. That is also a factor. And I think, in my view, without condoning Islamic extremism and violence at all, I believe that we are living today in a very brittle atmosphere. I'm not subscribing to anybody else's opinion. You have a union cabinet, 395 members of parliament of the BJP, without a single representation of the largest minority. You have a situation where right after Mr. Narendra Modi came and said Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, you had a union minister make a speech drawing a distinction between Ramzadeh and Ramzadeh. And she was let off with a pat on her, with a little bit of admonition. You had during the COVID times an entire movement which was launched by the Bajrang Dal and others about Corona Jihad, about Roti Jihad, sort of demonizing an entire community. Thirdly, I believe that acts of Islamic extremism should not taint an entire community. Similarly, acts of the ultra-right in any religion, including Hinduism, should not in any way dilute the fact that essentially Hinduism is a tolerant, plural, and an exclusive religion. So therefore, I think we need to introspect. 97% of cattle lynchings have happened after
now,
2014.
Fair enough. Let me bring in Mr. Dasgupta. Somewhere.
It would have been good if our Prime Minister, who made a slogan of inclusion, would have straight away condemned it strongly.
Okay, see, again, somewhere I feel that there is this implicit suggestion that Hindus are almost entirely responsible for the upkeep of Indian secularism. And that's where I worry, Mr. Dasgupta. Do you think I'm reading this right in what Mr. Verma is saying?
Two hands to clap.
Okay, two hands to clap.
No. I think you're absolutely right to. I think you're absolutely right to express a degree of concern at the certain one-sidedness of this so-called secular communal narrative which is going on. Now, Pawan Verma made a very valid point, and he said, yes, there is a time for greater conversation between religious communities. I agree with it. I agree with it wholeheartedly. I've been saying this quite openly. But this cannot proceed on the assumption and if the belief that one side believes it has the monopoly of the truth. Now, the moment you say you have the monopoly of the truth and that everyone else is either worshipping false gods or worshipping or guilty of undertaking falsehoods, etc., then the scope for conversation becomes almost zero. And what has been happening in a very large case of these attacks of intolerance, is the belief that those who have been targeted by these actually are the enemy. They are the enemy on the strength of the fact that they happen to profess faiths which are not to this person's individual liking. Now, that's no way in which a conversation can begin. That's no way in which public order can be established. And this is precisely what is happening everywhere, that this exclusivist domain which is being sought to be set up. Now, the problem with the liberal narrative is that they will say, yes, you're quite right in saying that you shouldn't have this exclusivist narrative, but you must understand that if certain people are underrepresented in the seat of government, that if they happen to be in a minority in certain places, there will be protests, they will come across as, they will protest in various ways, etc. And various other clashes will assume a different connotation. Now, that's not an argument. You're quite right in saying that if the entire onus for the defense of secularism for a very, very long time in India had been put at the door of the Hindu community. The others, suppose any other community, they were supposed to be passive beneficiaries. And it's this which has invoked a sort of backlash. And this backlash, I don't believe is a good thing, but I can understand the context in which the backlash has taken place. And this backlash needs to be stopped. And this backlash will not stop if what we are seeing in Udaipur, what we are seeing in various parts of the country and overseas are going to continue. It will not stop if an internal matter of India on the question of Article 370, on the question of Nupur Sharma, on the question of this Citizenship Amendment Act, these are made into Islamic issues which affect the entire Qawm. So there is politics and there is a certain interpretation of theology which stands in the way, and both feed on each other, and these stand in the way of getting some sort of meaningful civilized conversation going. But it is helped, I keep on maintaining, this is helped by the fact that at the same time the Islamists feel, oh, the liberals are, to use Lenin's words, useful idiots. They can be brought over to our sides, used and discarded at will. But they serve a particular purpose. And as long as the liberals believe that they are serving that purpose of being handmaidens of a very sinister form of intolerance, then this is going to happen. And we are going, and I'm glad that you've chosen to attack that belief, that squeamishness, that selective indignation, and I believe that that is to today in India on the retreat, which is why you get shrills of the shrills of protest from liberals saying, we are the ones who are under threat, and everyone that doesn't agree with Modi is being targeted.
Well, viewers, we've heard two sides. I'm going to leave it at this, but I'm going to end by saying, and picking up a little bit from where Mr. Verma left. Okay, Mr. Verma, yes, you want to respond, but just hear me out, because you used these words. You said that, acts of Islamist hate shouldn't be allowed to taint the entire community. Hindus haven't attracted this type of stereoification is because moderate Hindus speak up. The fact is that we don't see that on the other side. And what worries me is that this sort of suggests that there is an tacit admission that terror is working. And this is frightening. It has frightful consequences for open, democratic exchange of ideas. Mr. Verma.
Very quickly, sir. I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you that there is a part of Islam which is fanatical. And as I said, I've condemned it. The only point I'm making is, and I urge Swapan and the party to which he belongs to try and see whether this gulf or divide can be in some way bridged. When you have a minister garlanding those who have been convicted for lynching, when you have the Bilkis Bano case where rapists and murderers have been given remission, I am equally condemning Islamic extremism. I'm trying to say that a multi-plural, multi-religious country like ours, with a kind of religion that Hinduism is, does not allow people who consider themselves saints to say there should be a genocide of Muslims. We need to introspect instead of only apportioning blame.
Okay, very quickly, Mr. Dasgupta, and I'll end it on your response.
Certainly we must introspect. Everybody must introspect. But I think there's a certain arrogance, there's a certain conceit on the part of liberals who believe that the other side is just full of hate, unlettered people who don't have any justification, who don't have any basis on what they say and do. But I think I'm very reassured by the fact that at least the weight of public opinion has made many liberals, and I include Pavan Verma in this, being quite now more emphatic in their condemnation of those who attacked Rushdie, those who attacked this. And I agree with him that yes, people who felicitate rapists have no place in a civilized society.
Well, I think we couldn't have got more honest, at least amongst the two panelists here on the show. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much for speaking to me. It's good to have these conversations, viewers, because it suggests that perhaps the media can also have a role in pointing out where the real problem is. And I want to extend this invite to our panelists here. Tariq Fatah joins us, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, Tausif Ahmed, Professor Atikur Rahman, political analyst, all of them here this evening. Dr. Ranganathan, I began by asking a very fundamental question of Mr. Swapan Dasgupta and Pavan Verma. We heard a frank and thankfully straightforward response from the gentleman, Mr. Verma. At least he sort of took a position against Islamist extremism, which I don't see being taken across the liberal ecosystem in the emphatic manner in which Mr. Verma did today speak up. Dr. Ranganathan, in your opinion, why is it that a certain section of our polity has allowed Islamist terrorism to have an unchallenged moment?
May I please take umbrage to one label that Dr. Swapan Dasgupta used for the people of this particular characteristic, which is he called them liberals. They are anything but liberals. I know he used it as a label to identify them, but they are as much of liberal dispensation as Hafiz Saeed is non-violent. I mean, they are the ones who are draconian by nature. They trample on free speech, Nehru down. If you were to read and understand history, you would know that there are more liberals who are, called right-wingers and Hindutwas than the real left-wing and those guys who are now, who've appropriated this self-proclaimed, if I may call them, liberals. But, Rahul, there are three issues here. And if we are to be honest, we have to talk about all three without worrying about the cost, which is being branded an Islamophobe. Now, it helps that people have already branded me a Hindutva, Sanghi, fascist, Islamophobic bigot. So I can talk about them. I don't know about you. But number one, this statement, terrorism has no religion, it's plain wrong. In 2019, the reputed German newspaper Welt came up with an astonishing statistics in its report, 18 years of terror. Islamist extremists have perpetrated 31,221 terror attacks based on religion and killed 146,811 people worldwide since 9/11. That's an average of 5 terror attacks every single day for 18 years. This is a never-ending process, and we have to be realistic about it. Ambedkar understood this really well, as he reiterated that as far as Islam is concerned, the world is divided into two regions, Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam. We don't need to be squeamish about it or embarrassed or politically incorrect or correct. And Muslims cannot rest until Dar al-Harb is converted into Dar al-Islam. A country which is ruled by a kafir, said Ambedkar, is Dar al-Harb to a Musliman. The basic feelings of deference and sympathy which predispose persons to obey the authority of government do not simply exist. I mean, this is not me saying this. So Muslim apologists should direct their rage, if at all, at Ambedkar, not me. Ethnic cleansing and genocide of Hindus of Kashmir has almost made it Dar al-Islam. Any revulsion now to Dar al-Harb will be severely resisted. We must understand this. Number two, tolerant people will always be subjugated through religious diktat. Not for nothing. do millions pour onto the streets demanding Sar Tan se Juda? They are not mad. They are not fanatics. They are following religious fundamentals. This is an argument, Rahul, we cannot win because we are men, not God. And God or Allah has specifically ordered that, quote, those who abuse Allah and His Messenger, Allah has cursed them in this world and the hereafter and prepared for them a humiliating punishment, 3357. And that the penalty for those who wage war against Allah, which is what Khomeini accused Rushdie of, and his messenger, is that they be killed or crucified, 533. For 1.8 billion Muslims, Allah's word is inviolable, and He Himself has said so, 3362, 6115, 1827, 634. We need to understand, anyone who is perceived to have abused Allah or His messenger will, sooner or later, meet the fate of Kamlesh Tiwari or Samuel Pati. It may take a week, a month, a year, a decade, or even 3 decades, as in Rushdie's case, but it will happen. Finally, briefly, Rahul, 3, and this is important. It is the so-called moderate Muslims perennially playing the victim card who are Islamophobic. That is, they fear Islam. I don't fear Islam, but they do. They fear Islam. They fear to bring out the commandments of the Holy Book in their entirety on Jews, Christians, polytheists, homosexuality, apostasy, heresy, dress code, wife beating, blasphemy, because they fear being called illiberal and hypocrites. So they end up condemning and branding as radicals the Muslims who are faithfully following the fundamentals. They snare the fundamentalists but spare the fundamentals. The irony is that the apologists, who themselves are Islamophobic, want non-believers and kafirs against whom so much violence has been ordered to feel good about it and not be fearful. Finally, Rahul, just 20 seconds to end. If you want the truth, here it is. You cannot do anything about it. It is a giant rolling machine that will crush you sooner or later. We need to accept this like Rabindranath Tagore did. We are simply biding time.
Okay. Let me bring in Mr. Tausif Ahmed. Mr. Tausif Ahmed, we are told every day by a certain group of terrorists, Islamist terrorists, Ghazwa-e-Hind. This is their proclaimed mission. I have several pamphlets in front of me, issued by the AKIS, issued by the TRF or other fronts of the Lashkar-e-Toiba, the ISIS. Now, what ideological moorings does Ghazwa-e-Hind have? If it is religion, then why not accept this and call it out? Perhaps then we will be able to stall this juggernaut that Dr. Ranganathan says is impossible to escape. I want to draw your attention to a quote from Jayaprakash Majumdar, TMC leader, on Mr. Rushdie's attack. Look at the false equivalences here. Previously, too much intolerance was seen across the world. Like there's intolerance under Modi rule, it's elsewhere too. Now, why, Tausif Saab, are we not recognizing what Dr. Ranganathan, what Swapan Dasgupta have said? And even Pawan Verma, to his credit.
Rahul, you see, I heard Mr. Pawan Verma speaking. He talked about introspection and he countered the allegation by Swapan Gupta with a counter facts. For example, he talked about a union minister going and garlanding the lynching accused in jail and various other incidents. But after that conversation is over, I've again started hearing Dr. Ranganathan with his own version of, with his own perception, with his own texts, and God knows where he gets all this, because as a common Indian Muslim does not know about Ghazwa-e-Hind, they come to know about Ghazwa-e-Hind from channels and in these TV debates. You may be correct that maybe these Ghazwa-e-Hind has some origin from ISIS or somewhere, wherever you are quoting. But in day-to-day life,
I would normally not interrupt, Rahul.
Ghazwa-e Hind are repeatedly talked to only
I never used the phrase Ghazwa-e Hind. I don't believe that is a Quranic dictum.
No, please do not interrupt. If you do not want to interrupt, then you'll have your term. Rahul, this is unfair.
Don't spread lies.
This is not fair. He will have his time.
Okay, one second.
You talked about it. You talked about Darul Harab.
No, I did not
You
talk
talked about Darul Harab, and God knows
Rahul,
what.
please
At least you talked about dozen times. You talked Allah.
Now, one second.
You took the name of Allah dozen times. You talked about Darul Harab and Darul whatever half a dozen times.
Those are Ambedkar's sentences. Don't be. Why are you abusing Ambedkar?
He will have.
I never
give him opportunity.
talked about Ghazwa-e Hind.
He's interrupting me.
Don't be anti-Dalit.
Okay, one second. Let me just come in. Let me come in. Gentlemen. First of all, Tawseef Saab, just listen to me. Tawseef Saab.
This is not fair.
Okay, 1 minute. He's keeping quiet. Let me just interject for 30 seconds. Let me just give me 30 seconds. 30 seconds and you can have the floor. Look, Tawseef Saab, he was quoting Ambedkar. Now you may call them whatever books and whatever, person, but he was quoting Dr. Ambedkar. Number one, he did not use the word Ghazwa-e Hind. I did because I have several pamphlets in front of me which refer to them. Here they are.
Darul Harab and Darul whatever.
Yeah, so he used those words because those are the words of Dr. Ambedkar. Now, you may reject what
and
Dr.
Allah
Ambedkar
a dozen times.
So what is he talking about? Allah? Rahul, can you please tell the other panelists to speak
I didn't hear
what they want to say? Did I take Tawseef's name?
Now let me finish.
Let him not allege things wrongly. Tawseef, you are allegedly a lawyer.
I am saying
this is not the way you frame arguments.
You can check up
please.
with the...
Don't take my name. You say what you have to say. B, even if you take my name, don't lie and put words in my mouth. That's all I'm requesting.
And then you can speak.
Is it anything wrong that I'm requesting?
Okay, let me say,
Ambedkar,
you finish your point and I'll get Dr. Ranganathan to
I want to talk about Ambedkar.
Yes.
Violence is condemned unequivocally. And I believe that every right-thinking person, whether an intellectual or a non-intellectual by your standard, or a liberal or a non-liberal by your standard, condemns violence. But what we've seen is that those who speak for BJP, they make allegations that Muslims are very violent people, and they for the sake of their argument, they produce these scriptures from wherever they get. I am saying Ambedkar talked about caste. Ambedkar talked about ending violence in the name of caste. What have we done as a society in India? Over 1.3 lakh cases of crime against Dalit since 2018, and at the top of the state, where the largest cases of crime against Dalits are registered, is Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Rajasthan. And you know where the least number of cases are? In West Bengal, with only 373 cases in 3 years. When can we end this violence? If we're talking about violence, it has to be intra-religion as well as inter-religion. Please talk about intra-religion violence as well.
So you want me to now
when we have a special law laid down by the parliament to stop atrocities against Dalit.
Okay, Tawseef Saab,
we saw a school child was beaten to death.
Of course.
A school child was beaten to death on the eve of independence. For trying to drink water from a pot which was meant for upper caste.
I agree with you.
Which was meant for... When will this caste end?
No, one second.
There are problems everywhere. But your focus for political reason, your focus is one place.
Right.
And I accept it and I say, yes, let us introspect. Yes, let us end this violence. But
Tawseef Saab, you can only end the violence when you start identifying what's causing it. What ideological undercurrent. Fair enough. I will say, I will concede.
Identify.
Okay, one second. Tawseef Saab.
What is the ideological reason for violence against Dalits?
Yes. So
what is the ideological reason?
Can I speak?
It comes from the religion.
Okay.
It comes from the religion. Who makes these castes?
Okay.
And it comes from the religion. Talk about it.
Can I speak? Fair enough, sir. You say that Hindus are inherently intolerant. Upper caste Hindus, they hate Dalits. That's what you're saying. And it's religiously ordained. Right? It's religiously ordained. Has that... No, one second. You're saying that. You're saying it comes from the religion. I'm only quoting you back. If you get a thrill out of...
I am quoting Ambedkar.
No, fair enough. You're quoting Ambedkar. He's also
he's
quoting
not.
Ambedkar. One
lying.
second. If he feels this is the case, then why don't you accept and come out and say with equal ambiguity that in Islam, like Pawan Verma said, there is a religious element to the violence. Just say it. Then we'll have the open conversation. आप एक religion को तो you can besmirch, no problem. But if you want a conversation, then you must say that there is an element.
Religion teaches you to
Okay.
commit violence.
Tariq Fatah, do you agree with Mr. Tausif Ahmed? And I want to bring in right after that Dr. Ranganathan to put his facts on the table, because I think there is an attempt here to try and label, as Dr. Ranganathan presaged, him an Islamophobe. So he also gets an injunction on his head. I also get one. And we are all both strung up from the corner of Aurangabad. As one particular MP said, he would like to see Nupur. So first, Dr. Tariq Fateh, go ahead.
Okay, let me put it. I hope the gentleman Tausif would hear himself out. There's a reason that right across North America, in Africa, from Mozambique to India to Central Asia to Chechnya, there is a genuine fear of the irrationality with which educated Muslims are behaving. Not only are they using what is the whataboutery in this, they are letting go of the exact injunctions given to us by our religion to destroy everything that a stone worshipper follows. Ghazwa Hind didn't come out of thin air. It has been there since the time this hadith was written. That not until every Hindu is converted to Islam, not until every Hindu temple is destroyed, will Roz-e-Qayamat come, and where every Muslim will then take his connecting flight to paradise and go to his 72 virgins. This concept of Darul Harb, Darul Islam is embedded. That is why there have been people who called on the Afghans to invade India. We don't have a problem if we are talking in terms of culture, cuisine, tradition, history, but to deny for Indian Muslims, whether they live in Bangladesh, Pakistan, or India, they're all Indian because the Indus flows in Pakistan, not in India. The contempt you have for Hindus is written on your faces. Let us be honest for once in a lifetime. The Quran explicitly says if you can't speak the truth, think about it, act about the truth, raise it to the level where it cannot be denied. And we are told that the two people who are enemies of Islam are Hanud or Yahud. I didn't invent these words. This comes from Urdu poetry. Sartan se juda is Urdu poetry. It emanates from your central northern Indian Islamic values of the racist superiority of the Urdu-speaking Muslim over not just the Hindus, but also of the Bhuka Bengali Musalman of Bangladesh and the Baloch and the Pashtun and the Sindhi. That is why Abul Kalam Azad came and told the Muslims, "Kahan ja rahe ho?" These are unsophisticated, unkempt Muslims. Don't go there. Abul Kalam Azad was more of a radical than Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He came from, after being born in Mecca, and then his speeches from Calcutta about pan-Islamism are written there. Is it not true that Muhammad bin Qasim's stories are printed in Urdu in Old Delhi? And if you go there as a Pakistani, people get excited and say, "Arey Tariq bhai, आइए आपको बताएं हम यहाँ क्या छाप रहे हैं, उर्दू में है कोई पढ़ ही नहीं सकता." You are printing, declaring a person, Muhammad bin Qasim, as a hero, the first Arab to invade India, and you know nothing about Raja Dair.
Okay, the important points that are being raised by Tariq Fateh, who is a person who speaks from the Muslim fold. Dr. Ranganathan, a quick one, setting the record straight so that no one strings you up. And then I want to bring Professor Atikur Rahman to respond to Tariq Fatah and yourself. Yes, sir.
No, thank you. No, I don't really mind, Tausif Bhai. You know, in the heat of the debate, one can get charged up and make false accusations. That's all right, as long as I get the chance to rebut. And as I said, I never mentioned Ghazwa-e-Hind. I never mentioned the other things that Tausif Bhai accused me of. And can I also just say, you know, when one comes for the debate, one has to prepare oneself. For example, when Tausif Bhai says that when you asked a straight question, why are Dalits being oppressed? And he said Hindu religion and the things that are there in Hindu religion are responsible for the oppression of Dalits. That's what he said it. Now, can I please correct him? In Vedas, there is no mention of caste, only Varna. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi advocated hereditary caste. You are a Bapu worshipper. It was Ambedkar who agreed that there is no mention of caste in the Vedas, only Varnas, but the caste and Vedas and Varnas over centuries have become so intertwined that the problem has been amplified. That is what Ambedkar said. So Ambedkar was not against Hinduism, even though he said, I was born a Hindu, but I won't die a Hindu. And which other religion worships a person who has committed apostasy? Ambedkar left Hinduism. We gave him Bharat Ratna. What is the punishment for apostasy in Islam? It's death. Second point. You see, this is also very important. And here, I am not going to comment on Mr. Atikur Rahman, even though we have our disagreements. What he believes is the verses that I quote verbatim. He believes that those kafirs were for only that time, 700 AD or something. The kafirs and all those apostates and unbelievers mentioned in the Quran do not represent the kafirs and unbelievers of the current world. We have a disagreement with that, that's fine. But I applaud him that he was one of the very few Muslim intellectuals, Rahul, and please prod him on that so that he replicates that. It's important that he said that Nupur did not commit blasphemy. What Nupur said was actually repeated or was taken from, derived from hadiths. He said it. I applaud him for that. So we need
Professor
more
Atikur Rahman,
people like Atikur Rahman.
Okay, please respond. Professor Saab, please.
Rahul, I do not subscribe to the idea that whatever terrorist elements on this earth are playing are bereft of any Quranic injunctions. I agree they take the advantage of all the Quranic injunctions. They try to trap the Muslim youth only in the name of Quran, Prophet Muhammad and Allah. And what they are doing is the misinterpretation of the Quranic revelations, and they are luring our youth, the Muslims, into terrorism. The blood and oxygen they are getting is from the scriptures, from the life of the Prophet, and from the religion of Islam. We need to cut this blood supply and the oxygen. But in turn, what we are doing, the people who want to stop terrorism, condemn terrorism, and disalign anything done in the name of terrorism, they are also doing the same thing. They are also telling us that the terrorism comes from the scriptures of Islamic theology. As Mr. Swapan Dasgupta said, terrorism comes from the teaching of Allah and the life of Prophet Muhammad. Darul Harab, Darul Aman, the concepts of Ghazwa-e-Hind are not Quranic. Nowhere in the Quran it is mentioned. What primarily I am telling you, Rahul, is whatever scriptures in the name of Quran are quoted are the quotations of the Orientalist thinkers because they were anti-Islamic, they were in contrast with Christianity, and since ages they are doing this job of misinterpreting the Quran so that Islam is condemned, Prophet Muhammad and Allah is condemned, so that Christianity is preached. Now, I will tell these people, in particular my two co-panelists, that what is a kafir? A kafir described in Tarjuma al-Quran by Maulana Abul Kalam Azad is not the kafirs of today, my Hindu brethren. This I have told you earlier on the debate. I can go on with several other minutes on this if you allow me. So primarily, Islam and the scripture, the Quran, does not tell the Muslims either to hate or kill the people in this present day world in the name of blasphemy, as was evident in the on the controversy of Nupur Sharma. Even Salman Rushdie, what Ayatollah Khomeini did in the 80s, the 21st century Muslim will abhor the idea of giving a clarion call to behead Salman Rushdie. And that is why I also condemn, Mr. Pawan Verma also condemned, that no, the killing and the beheading of Salman Rushdie or Nupur Sharma cannot be connected with the Quranic scripture. So I beseech upon your co-panelists to please de-alienate the Quranic scripture from terrorism. So far you do not do it. So far you do not misinterpret that you will be continuously supplying blood and oxygen to the same Al-Qaedas and the ISIS, and terrorism won't end.
Okay, look, I've run out of time.
20 seconds.
No, 1 second, I've run out of time. Look, let that be the last word. It's a good place. Now, we can all disagree whether it was it was an injunction that has been written in or not, etc., and we can keep going around, because the moment you say no and you bring out your set of facts, which you have done, Mr. Fateh, as well as, of course, Dr. Ranganathan quoting the hadith, etc., the other side will say, well, that's an interpretation that belonged to a X time or a Y time and this, that. So we'll keep going around in circles. Viewers, you see, it is important to hear these voices. It is important to hear Professor Atikur Rahman. Because even if there are young people out there who are decapitating tailors in Udaipur, they will realize, if they hear Professor Atikur Rahman, that they are being brainwashed.
That they won't.
It is important for them to hear Professor Atikur Rahman. I wish Tausif Ahmed had indulged in less whataboutery, putting the blame on Hindus. Had he spoken with the clarity of Professor Atikur Rahman, perhaps we would have had a more importantly focused debate on dissuading the young minds who are perhaps being radicalized on the back of something that doesn't exist. I'm not saying it does or doesn't. I'm just saying, if one was to believe Professor Atikur Rahman, why aren't there more Professor Atikur Rahmans standing in Srinagar, for instance, with megaphones, hundreds and thousands of them, and saying exactly this? Can you imagine the message that will go out to the likes of Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed?
You're dreaming, sir.
Al-Qaeda. Well, sir, that's all we can do, because Dr. Ranganathan has said, when you wake up, the juggernaut will flatten you. So let's dream. At least it's a pleasant one. I leave it at that, viewers. Thank you very much.